I've watched this pattern for over 40 years. A new system comes in, a new framework, a new way to solve problems, a new promise, and we're told each time, this is going to fix everything. I saw it with local area networks. I saw it with project management. I saw it with TQM. I saw it with Agile. And now we're seeing it with artificial intelligence, that AI is going to solve everything. And here's the uncomfortable truth. AI does not fix broken leadership. It's an amplifier. It can scale knowledge. It can also scale problems. And when you scale knowledge without wisdom, things get dangerous because you're scaling problems. So if we're going to talk about using AI responsibly, we need to talk about the difference between knowledge and wisdom. And we need to talk about what that difference means for leaders in terms of discarding old rules, creating new ones, modifying existing ones in a way so that we can move the organization forward. Now, in the last video, I talked about what happens when the rules don't hold. And it's not because people are incompetent, it's that the situation has changed, circumstances have moved, and so the old model just doesn't make it anymore. And I had said in situations like that, that's where the leader needs to come forward and distinguish between and focus upon the three major aspects of this shifting environment: leadership, governance, and management. Because if issues associated with those three components aren't resolved effectively and those three components aren't integrated, leadership, governance, and management, you end up with a train wreck. And what happens then if you bring in artificial intelligence? It's just an amplifier. So if there are good things going on, the good can get better. And if there's bad things going on, the bad can get worse. In other words, AI doesn't fix broken models. It's just an amplifier. And to repeat, if we're going to resolve thorny issues, we need to get back to those three components in complex situations: leadership, governance, and management. Leadership asks the question, well, what matters now? What forces in the universe do we need to pay attention to? What does simplicity mean in terms of pulling everything together to function in a healthy, rule-driven way? Governance is about the general principles and rules that are needed to guide the third component, management. And management's all about the rule book and what we need to do to get things right and meet production goals. So leadership's about what matters now. Governance is about what are the key principles and the broad rules that apply. And then management is about the specific rules that we apply on a daily basis in order to produce whatever the desired results are. And in a stable environment, there can be some blurring where the three tend to overlap, especially if you're in a small to mid-sized business. You're going to experience overlap. In fact, if the business is small enough, the owner may have to jump onto the production line to get things done. But the thing is, what do you do when the rules don't hold? In the previous video, I talked about Sullenberger and the miracle on the Hudson and what he went through. Now keep in mind, he had to decide what to do when all power was lost to both engines, something for which he had no training. And the key thing he had to do is he had to distinguish between knowledge and wisdom, because what was required in order to survive the engine's stalling is he had to come up with something. The problem is it was a wicked problem. There was no known solution for both engines going out. So rather than the solution, he had to come up with a solution. And this is one of the main characteristics of wicked problems. So all the knowledge in the world isn't going to solve the problem. It may be needed to solve the problem. But Sullenberger was in a wisdom-based situation. He had to figure out what to do. He had all the systems that he needed, plenty of information, but the knowledge alone was insufficient. In fact, initially they went through all the routines for which they trained to try to get the engines to restart. It didn't matter. So it was a wicked problem. What they experienced didn't match any model. And what he had to do was he had to change his frame of mind. And that's a leadership decision. And he decided to view the airplane as the world's largest glider, the world's heaviest glider. And he switched to a different frame of mind. Fortunately, he had years of experience as a glider pilot, and he was able to do calculations appropriate for a glider that accepted the limitations of having a powerless aircraft. And he saw then his only option at the time was landing on the Hudson. And fortunately, weather-wise, it was a mild day, so the Hudson was a smooth surface. So there wasn't the right answer. There was an answer that worked. And this is what wisdom's about. Okay, so how does this roll back to AI? Well, the mistake that leaders could make is focusing only on a knowledge-based solution, which is what AI is about. So imagine a leader's in Sullenberger's position and the engines are out. And the leader mistakenly turns to AI, and the only models that are in AI are the ones for what you do when you actually have power. In other words, the knowledge is insufficient. So when AI is applied to the leadership position, there's a risk of picking the wrong strategic model or just making up a strategic model that's totally inappropriate, doesn't fit for the situation. And when AI is applied to governance, there's a risk of confusing the precision with which AI will give you its predictions, confusing that with judgment, as if it's right. Well, that's where, when we look at addiction, for example, it's easy to behave like an addicted gambler and view patterns that show up in AI as if we're on a streak. And well, the fact of the matter is AI just delivers probabilities. And then when we get to management, when AI is applied as a knowledge base and mistakes have been made at the leadership and governance level, well then at the management level, there's the risk of doing perfectly the absolutely wrong thing. It's something that makes things worse or just is a waste of resources. So this difference between knowledge and wisdom is really, really critical. Because in knowledge, we ask, how do we fix this? So think of all the preconceptions that are there when we ask that question, how do we fix this? There's a lot of assumptions. That's in contrast to wisdom, which asks, what are we doing and why are we doing it? And have we checked our basic assumptions to see if they jive with reality? I've seen this mistaken application of a knowledge amplifier being substituted for wisdom. In the 80s, it was local area networks. We're going to pull the computers out from the controller's office, and we're going to apply them broadly. And information's going to see the light of day, and everything's going to be wonderful. Then I saw it with project management. All we have to do is come up with a critical path diagram. We'll figure this out, and by God, we'll meet the end date, and we'll meet the budget, and we'll meet the quality. And then it occurred with TQM, Total Quality Management. We stay focused on the customer. What are we delivering? What are the requirements to satisfy the customer, etc. And if we do all that, everything will be fine. And then it occurred again with Agile. If we just dump project management and focus on Agile methods, somehow, I don't know, we're going to achieve nirvana and we'll be on the top of Mount Olympus with the gods. Excuse my sarcasm, but I've just seen enough of knowledge-based systems being applied as a substitute for wisdom and the giddiness that goes with them. I'll be doing a talk with an AI expert on this whole issue of greed and addiction in AI. If you're interested in that recording, let me know and I'll get it to you. And the problem with all this is the fear associated with leaning into wisdom. Knowledge provides security. Wisdom asks scary questions like, what if we're doing the wrong thing? The example I like to give frequently is the transportation business. When the automobile, with the internal combustion engine came about, well, it took horses to make things happen. So engines and automobiles and eventually trucks were viewed as novelties. And so those who invested heavily in horse-drawn equipment kind of disappeared. Some tried to make it, like Studebaker, but they were a bit late to the game, and the market was just moved away from them. But that's a separate story. I'm segueing here. So that when we rely on only knowledge-based systems, we're going to amplify whatever it is we're doing. AI is simply an amplifier. And what can happen is, if we should be driving for new wisdom, which is scary, and instead we're driving for more knowledge, we're just throwing gas on the fire. This is really simple. We're just going to make things worse. Now, if we have the courage to be wise and look and see what assumptions we need to change, what behaviors we need to change, how we need to interact with the environment and our stakeholders in a different manner, if we have the wisdom to do that, then we can start asking knowledge-based questions, and AI as an amplifier can help us. But if we refuse to go into those scary places, AI will just make things worse. In fact, I had mentioned greed and addiction, and something important to say is that AI doesn't create greed. AI doesn't create addiction. In fact, AI doesn't create dysfunction. For the third or fourth time, AI is an amplifier. And in being an amplifier, it removes friction. And so how it can become dangerous is we may have an older system that's hobbled some, but things are slowed down enough that correction can be made by key people that are probably silent and not really recognized, but they can correct the errors that are occurring in the system because there's enough drag in the system that they've got time to make those corrections to keep the customer happy. So when AI comes along and it embodies the rules that are existing, and we get some of those people that are the steady eddies, that are the buffers, that are the ones that correct the mistakes, well, if we get them out of the way or push on them to move faster, then AI just causes the situation to explode. The good gets better and the bad gets worse. And if watching this video makes you uncomfortable, well, then that simply means you're aware that there's some wisdom that is needed. And the question is, do you know? Do you know what's needed? And you may not. And so it's time to search. This isn't fun, especially since as the head of the organization, people are looking to you. And if you're hesitating and you're admitting that there are flaws in the current setup, well, the clock's ticking and people are watching, and your customer has expectations that are time limited. This is a scary situation. And part of it being a scary situation is there may be the urge to go for speed. If we just speed things up, we can make them better. And essentially, that's an addictive behavior. And all it does is it hastens the downfall and maybe even be an amplifier and make it worse. So you have management trying to run the rules faster. You have governance trying to squeeze the organization tighter. And you have leadership that's flummoxed, just trying to find something that works. Now, in the last video, I had mentioned there are times when the leader really needs to step in. And it's important because the team is looking. They want to see what the leader's going to do. They want inspiration. They want a sense of hope. So the leader needs to stay away from pushing, just trying to make things go faster. We're going to put in double shifts, etc. The leader needs to be careful about changing the governance rules, because that could just disrupt all your projects and disrupt all your flow. And so what we come back to is the leader is in a very vulnerable spot, and their job is to be still and think. Think about what's going on and think about a better way to do things. This is really difficult because all that pressure is there. You can feel it when you walk into the office or you walk into the building. Or if you're going to that online meeting and you're the leader and you're not quite sure what's going on, you're in Sullenberger's position. At those times, it's best to be honest. At those times, it's best to be humble. At those times, it's best to ask for input. Because in those situations, a lot of what helps in determining a solution is information that surfaces from those closest to the problem. So humility is a must. This can be hard if you're used to being the big dog. So the job of the leader just might be to slow things down. And again, be humble. Let people know we need to establish a new direction. I need your input. And if you do that, there's an element that can surface, which I'll talk about in another video, called self-similarity. And that's where the people that work with you feel that they're part of it. They take a sense of ownership, as if they're actually the only person in the organization. They act like they're the CEO. Well, that's really inspiring, because what happens then is people start becoming proactive. But now you got to be careful and dampen that, because you're putting either a major modification to the way work gets done, you're putting that in place, or you're coming up with a new way to do things. Once again, we're back to vulnerability. But it's the only way to move forward. It's to be humble, to be open to input, to be able to hold cognitive dissonance, and just wait for the solution to emerge. If you take one thing away from this, make it this. AI is a human problem rather than a technical problem. If your leadership is sound, AI will strengthen it. If your leadership is weak, AI will explode it. If your governance is principled, AI will reinforce it. If your governance is unprincipled, AI will hasten its destruction. If your management is disciplined, AI will reinforce it. If your management is undisciplined, AI will accelerate the chaos. Remember, knowledge accumulates, wisdom decides. And without wisdom, the downfall is accelerated. I'll see you in the next video.